So, this year is the 35th anniversary of The Legend of Zelda, which is insane because that means it's been a decade since Skyward Sword was released, and that makes me feel old. It's also been 4 years since Breath of the Wild came out, which is also a pretty long time, but with Breath of the Wild sequel somewhere on the horizon, I think it's time I talk about some of the things I hope they include in the sequel. Now, my main purpose for this video is to build upon the structure of Breath of the Wild. I'd like to keep the core of the game the same, while introducing new things that will hopefully improve the player experience. That being said, let's begin. Firstly, and I think I speak for a lot of people when I say, more dungeons / divine beasts, whichever one we end up getting. I'm a little bit torn on this one because on one hand, I really did enjoy the open-ended nature of the divine beasts and the multiple ways in which you could complete them. The non-linear nature allows for users to attack and solve it in different ways, and I think that's a really great gameplay mechanic, and I definitely do not want to take that away from the players because it allows for the game to act as a sandbox with the only limits being our own creativity as a player. But on the other hand, the divine beasts lacked any distinct personality to them, and the puzzles could have been a little more interesting. I think different themes, or maybe even just using different textures to help make each dungeon or beast look differently, would go a long way in making them more visually memorable. In the base game, Vondaboris was probably the most well designed from a puzzle standpoint, but if we include the DLC Divine Beast, well, I think that Divine Beast showed how lacking the others were because it was just so well designed. And if we're going to go back to the Divine Beast thing in the sequel, the DLC Divine Beast needs to serve as our baseline, and they only have to go up from there. Personally, I think they could be a little bit longer as well, but that might just be me. I know I do tend to enjoy the longer dungeons in Zelda games though. All these issues though stem from Link's limited items. Instead of being designed around one particular item or a combination of items that the player has at that point, the Divine Beasts are forced to be designed around a few runes that Link always has. The end result is that each beast feels just a little too similar in my opinion. So in order to address this properly and keep the core of the game the same, I can really only think of 3 solutions. The first would be having more runes and thus having more items to play around with, which seems to be like the most plausible of the outcomes. 2 would be add in some sort of crafting system in which you can use materials found in the world or in the dungeon / divine beasts to create temporary items like slingshots, ropes, grappling hooks, etc. As long as these items can be found when you need them, I think it might be a decent solution as well. It's not perfect because I can definitely see a situation where a player might get annoyed about having to find all these items or not having the item that they need, but I think careful placement of enemies or chests that would contain these key items could really help alleviate that issue. And lastly, my third proposal is a sort of hybrid type approach where Link is essentially reset at the beginning of each dungeon to nothing and has to find items within the dungeon itself in order to survive. Maybe you could even have like a dungeon specific rune that only works inside those areas. Think kind of like Eventide Island, but a little more intense. Personally, I believe doing any of these would allow the developers to keep the open world nature of the game, while also giving more creative freedom to the dungeons or divine beasts. Next up, let's talk about shrines. Am I the only one who thinks it'd be kinda weird for them to return in Breath of the Wild 2? Every time I think about it, it just doesn't make as much sense as the original. Plus, I think I'm okay with them being gone altogether. So how about this? Instead of having 120 shrines, we have like 8 to 12 fully fleshed out dungeons. But again, that only solves half of our problem. Shrines were mainly used as a way to get more hearts or stamina for Link, and because we want those mechanics to return, we'll need something to fill that gap. So how about we revamp side quests to take that place? I'm not sure how everyone else felt, but the side quests in Breath of the Wild seemed a little bit lacking. So what if we take those side quests and rework them into something that actually affects the world? Think the Terrytown side quest from Breath of the Wild. Completing that made a permanent invisible change to the world directly through your actions. So not only did you want to complete it because you just wanted to see what would happen, but also because you would end up getting a reward. Using that idea, we can expand that to most of the other side quests in the game. So maybe if we do things for people around the world such as, I don't know, maybe take back a village from a group of bokoblins, use bombs to clear debris and create a new route for like a Goron mine track so you can easily use it as a way to get up and down Death Mountain quickly, or slay some sort of secret boss type enemy. I don't know. I'm admittedly not great with coming up ideas for side quests, and I'll give credit to Breath of the Wild. It did have a few things like that already in the game, but I think what I'm trying to say is anything that we can do that would make a positive and impactful change in the world or have some sort of lasting effect would be cool, and then we can tack the hearts and staminas that you would normally get from completing a shrine onto those side quests instead. And I think that would be a good replacement for the shrines while still keeping the fundamental gameplay elements intact. Now for my third change, let's talk about the map itself. Assuming they do end up using the same map as the first game, and at this point it seems like they will, I would love to see some sort of change in density. Now what I mean by that is, we've seen Hyrule in its destroyed state, and through cutscenes in spin-off games like Age of Calamity, we've seen glimpses of it in its intact state. But now that we're in the post-Calamity era, I'd like to see Hyrule in a state of rebuilding. I think it'd be nice to have more things going on in the world. In Breath of the Wild you have like these pockets of distinct little villages or towns, and that's really about it. Between that you've got ruins, and occasionally you'll stumble across an NPC along a pathway, but I think a lot more could really be done to liven up the world a bit now. Like, I totally get why that wasn't the case for Breath of the Wild, but let's remember, at the end of Breath of the Wild, Zelda even mentions to Link that she and him have a lot of work to do to rebuild Hyrule, and I think that would be a cool thing to see in the sequel. Plus, adding more towns could also be a great source for side quests, which plays back into my other idea of how to replace shrines. So I think this is kind of a no-brainer. And besides, I don't think anyone would be against having more things to find in Breath of the Wild. Like, exploring is half the fun of that game, so by adding in things that promote and build upon that foundation of the first game, I think it can only stand to make the game better than the original. At least, that's what I hope would happen. And lastly, this is more of a quality of life change, but I think having a weapon durability meter and a way to repair them, or maybe even fuse weapons like in Hyrule Warriors / Age of Calamity, would be a great addition. I understand the weapon breaking system was intended to encourage players to try different playstyles and adapt to each situation, but I also know for me personally, once I figured out where all the good weapons were, I would just stockpile those as much as I possibly could, so I feel like a lot of people did that in Breath of the Wild as well, so I don't really think having a system where weapons constantly break is really the best thing. So instead, I think it'd be cool if we could possibly take that system, keep it intact, but tack onto it the ability to repair them or fuse them with other weapons. So you'd be able to like transfer different stats or buffs to them via like a smithing NPC or something like that. I think it would be a cool addition. It might make balancing the game a little bit harder, since I can definitely see a scenario where a player would fuse some crazy powerful weapon and then maybe never use anything else, but I don't think that's too far off from how the game is already played, so I think adding something like that would really only stand to benefit the players at this point. So those are just some things that I would love to see changed or added into Breath of the Wild sequel. Now you can agree or disagree with me in the comments down below, and I'd love to hear if you got any cool ideas of your own. I mean, it has been a while since we've heard anything about Breath of the Wild sequel, so at this point, I think we'd all be happy if they just gave us an official title. E3's digital event is around the corner, and Nintendo has already confirmed they will be participating, so I'm assuming we're going to get a Nintendo Direct or something of that sort, which would be a perfect time to reveal the sequel to Breath of the Wild. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video, so if you guys enjoyed it, a like rating would be greatly appreciated. If you want to see more of my videos, consider subscribing. But once again, guys, my name is Matt, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.